All right, so while I'm waiting for this to pop up, I'm not sure why it's not popping up. A couple of things. I have your critical thinking challenges graded, and I have those posted to D2L. On the syllabus, it says that we'll start talking about your group projects today. However, we didn't finish talking about, we did not finish talking about due process, so we're going to finish that. I had a meeting that got rescheduled, so I know you're going to be heartbroken that I have to let you go a little early today. The president decided to have a meeting at 3 o'clock. So I had a meeting scheduled for Title IX at 3 o'clock. I don't know why this is not coming up. Oh. All right. So I had a meeting scheduled for 3 o'clock. That meeting got pushed back into part of our time slot as a result of the fact that the president wants to talk to us about the budget cuts that are occurring. So we'll go a little early today. I know that you're going to be disappointed that you're not getting to present. If you feel heartbroken by that, you let me know. You can come over to my office with me and you can give me a presentation there, and I'll let you do it that way. If you're just absolutely insistent that you have to get this out today, that it's you crammed it in your little head and you're not going to be able to remember it if you don't. So we have some people that are here to talk about and promote our sales program, which I don't think will be a hard sell for some of you, but for others, something that you maybe want to consider. And it came up, good. So I will sit down and shut up and let them go.
I'm Jessica, this is Dylan and Aubrey. We're from the Advanced Selling course, and we're going to tell you a little bit about the sales program. We'll start with Dylan.
So a little bit background about myself. I'm graduating December 2016. My major is professional sales with a minor in marketing. A little bit of work experience about me. I was in the military for 4 years, didn't really sell anything there. But what I did do now is I manage a cigar company here in Oklahoma City, and I sell a lot of premium cigars to restaurants, golf courses all across the nation. You may have heard some of the Greenbrier, the Broadmoor. We sell high-end cigars to high-end places. And why sales? I think sales is really easy to interact with people, and I'm a really big people person, so I like to talk to anybody and anyone. If anybody wants to talk to me after the class about this sales program, I'd be willing to sit there and talk to you about why I think it's a good move. And in sales, you can make a lot of really good money, and especially in marketing as well. If you have that minor in marketing, you can make a ton of money, and that's what makes the world go round, is that green stuff.
Okay, I'm Aubrey Wiley, and I'm in the sales program right now. And I work at the Workers' Compensation Commission for the state of Oklahoma. And I don't sell anything, but I guess myself, kind of. But I'm looking into an internship opportunity where I can earn some credit through the school. And I actually got that opportunity through the sales program during one of my sales calls. So that was pretty neat. And the reason I chose sales is because I like the fact that I could make my own schedule, I could control how much money I'm going to be making, and I'm very self-driven and competitive, so that was a good thing for me to get into. So.
And I'm Jessica. I'll be graduating in August 2016. My major is professional selling, and I'm getting a minor in marketing. A little bit of my work experience, I did some retail, and I'm currently working at a pharmacy as a pharmacy technician, so I kind of wanted to put those together and do pharmaceutical sales, and that's kind of why I chose to go into sales. A little bit about the courses. You would take personal selling first, and then you'd go to the advanced course. It is offered by Dr. Geary, the personal selling courses. Through the class, you get to do real life experiences through some sales pitches that you would do with your classmates. And you get to enhance your public speaking skills.
Okay, opportunities in the sales team. Obviously, the advanced sales provides with you the opportunity for scholarships and positions with the UCO sales team. So actually, once you progress through the program, you take the first level class and then the advanced class, you have an opportunity to actually try out for the sales team that travels around the United States and actually does sell. Where was the last competition? New Orleans? Is that where it was?
No, we just got back from Atlanta.
From Atlanta. So you have opportunities to go different places and actually sell products, which is really nice. And it's very competitive and provides a great experience. So that's something that when you actually get out into the workforce and you're making those sales calls or cold calls, you're gonna have a little bit of experience under your belt, and you're not actually going to be so gun shy when you're actually doing those. And the possibilities from competing somewhere else, cool, like New Orleans or Nashville, Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, those are really nice opportunities that you get to experience that you may not have the experience with a different degree that you're getting here at university. And the internships and job opportunities. So you can get internships through this university, and it's going to be 3 credit hours, which will go towards your degree. The majority of them are paid internships now. That didn't used to be the case, but now all internships are paid. And the advanced professional sales class provides many networking opportunities, and like Paycom, Northwest Mutual, Farmers, T Systems. There's also different opportunities out there for different people as well. And what's really nice in the professional sales class is we have business cards made up for us. So those are great networking tools. If you go, let's say, to a bar, or you go to a lunch meeting with different individuals, you can pass up those cards. Tell them a little bit about yourself, tell them about what you're doing at the university, how unique our sales program is to this university. And it's a really great way to get yourself out there and provide feedback for yourself too.
Okay, and there was actually a student, Corey Thompson, who graduated from the sales program in 2014, and she landed a job with Tech Systems, which we've actually had like a sales call with them just recently. And I'm actually looking for an internship with them. So she's making over 6 figures, and she lives in Alabama, and she loves it. So there's a lot of good opportunities in this program. We're one of 30, I believe, in the nation, and so it's highly competitive, and it's a great opportunity to get involved in.
If you are interested, the personal selling classes that are available, there's one in the summer, and I believe it's from Dr. Kaiser, and then there's a few in the fall to get started in. So, are you ready to join the sales program?
So we're going to leave some business cards for you guys, and if you have any questions about the program, you can call us. We can get you in contact with our professors, or you can talk to Dr. Geary here as well, and he will be able to set you guys up on the right path for success.
Good presentation. Thank you. You have something for me to sign, I believe.
Yes, right here.
Because I was supposed to do it after the meeting,
And like never came back to me, so I was like,
If you guys want them, they're right here.
call me during normal business hours.
There you go.
it's hard, but trust me.
So, thank you guys for presenting on that. I appreciate it. Some of you are already in the sales program. How did you all do at nationals? You didn't compete. Jonathan competed.
Jonathan and Cody competed. They didn't make it to the second round. They went through wild card, but Cody signed with Waste Management while we were there, and Jonathan got offers from Waste Management and another company.
Yeah, that's one of the big advantages to going to the sales competitions, is that all of these companies, and I think I've mentioned this before, have a trade show booth at the job fair that
That's huge.
they go to, and it's a really good opportunity, and they are specifically targeted towards sales. Another thing, we are the only department in the College of Business and the only department on campus that has our own career fair specifically for sales and marketing. So that's another advantage to being a marketing and sales student. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, if you all want cards, Dylan has left some, Jessica's left some there for you. We do those for you to hand out at the job fairs. So that's another advantage of going on in advanced sales. So we were talking, and I'll move the camera, last time, about due process, the heart of due process, and we started, I have your papers graded, and I will hand those back right now. for the last two critical thinking challenges. So let's see. The first one was the employee rights. And this goes along with that. So I've got Casey, Katie, and Joanna. Logan, the Zellers. And I bestowed Christian love and mercy on this group by going ahead, even though Mr. Barnaby was not here to turn in the paper. I was extraordinarily kind, but I would like to see it. The answers on those were extraordinarily good, I thought. So, Zellers. There's this one. Look at these. Kyla, Sarah. There's yours. For that one. There you go. So where did we leave off with talking about? So we had a couple of groups that had talked about what they wanted for due process. Where did I leave off? So we had this idea that you wanted there to be some kind of reason, a process. You wanted to know what the job requirements were. And we talked a little bit about this one. One of the things that companies will usually do is they'll say other duties as assigned, so you can't say things like that's not in my job description. One of my friends got fired. He went to OSU with my brother, and he got fired. He worked at the Mexican restaurant that's on the way into Stillwater. It's the big one that's sort of on the north side of the road there. And El Vaquero, that's it. And everyone would like stop him and say, sir, he got fired the first day. Because they'd say, sir, could you give me some more ice? No, it's me, Mesa. And so a lot of companies, in order to deal with this, don't let you say that this is not my table, not my job. They put that other duties as described, or other duties as assigned. So what else? Who did we leave off with? Who else had some ideas?
Last.
What? You
I think we were last.
were last. Did you guys give me your due process requirement?
We're in the same group.
Okay. So you all went, and then this group over.
We went first.
You went first. So we had everybody's due process then? Is that right? Is there anybody that didn't talk about their due process requirements?
I don't think we went.
Okay, all
I
right.
think they were about the same. I think all of the ones that were talked about, we had talked about as well. We just wanted proof of something. We just wanted them to confront us about it and be honest from a reliable
Oh, okay, so you want
source.
confrontation?
Yes.
Okay, along with confrontation, what do you want with that? With confrontation. So let's think about this, let's dig deeper, and let's think about this not in terms of a job, but let's think about this in terms of a trial. Let's suppose you're accused of a crime. The right of confrontation is contained in the United States Constitution, which says that you have the right to confront witnesses against you in a criminal proceeding. So what does that mean? So the state, let's think about this, the state will put on evidence. The state bears the burden of proof in a criminal prosecution, and the burden of proof that you have to sustain in order to convict somebody is what? What's the burden of proof? What's the level of proof? Yeah, beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to sustain a burden of proof, so the state will put on these witnesses, which will usually be things like eyewitnesses, which are notoriously bad, aren't they? Eyewitnesses are notoriously, and once people see somebody in a lineup, and there are all of these instances of people being wrongly accused. Barry Scheck, who was part of the OJ Dream Team, started a project called the Innocence Project, and they've now since discovered that there are all of these people that have been accused of things like rape. One of them was a guy from Tulsa who was accused of rape. He had very odd colored red hair. And he was a swimmer, so he was accused of raping a child, which that, by the way, is the lowest of the low in the prison system. He was a swimmer, so he trimmed all of his body hair. And they found trimmed body hair on the child in the rape kit. and he was accused of it. They didn't have advanced genetic testing, though, at the time he was tried. And years later, through the Innocence Project, they found out that, and he had said at the time, he had these eyewitnesses that said he was in the area, and he was like, no, I wasn't. I was at a skeet shooting competition in Texas at the time. And the jury still convicted him. And it wasn't until we got DNA evidence that they said, you know, obviously this is the wrong guy. And the guy, they showed pictures of him on a project that I saw on television on 60 Minutes on the Innocence Project. They could have been twins. And it was even more odd because the rapist was also a swimmer, and so he shaved all of it. So there were these, when you shave your hair, it leaves a distinctive cut in the hair follicle, in the hair that grows. And so there's all this circumstantial evidence that seemed to point to him, but it turns out he wasn't, so it's beyond a reasonable doubt. I don't think we're going to hold any employer to that standard. But with regard to this idea of confrontation, you should be able to do what? So what can you do in a criminal proceeding with this idea of the regard to right to confrontation? What do you get in the criminal proceeding that you maybe would want also in your workplace? And they're probably not going to give you in the workplace, right? Your attorney gets to do what with these witnesses? So they put the victim on, they put the eyewitnesses on, they put the police officer on. And what does your attorney get to do? They get to ask them questions. That's called cross-examination, right? To try and discredit those witnesses. Would you want that? Would you want to be able to confront? So somebody says, for example, you aren't doing your job. You come in late every day. Would you want to be able to say, well, who is it that said that about me? And, you know, why would they know? Maybe you'd want that right of confrontation. What else would you want? So what else did you all have? That was it? Okay, so I think this idea of process, confrontation, knowing job requirements, making sure that it's reasonable and not arbitrary are all really good things to think about in terms of due process. Now, in the legal sense of due process, what we have are two types of due process. And I think, although these are not required, obviously, of businesses, one of the things that I would say is, again, going back to this idea of we're not cogs in a machine, what cost is it if you don't provide it? Now, management will a lot of times say that the cost of providing due process is too great and we shouldn't have to do that. But there are two types of due process that we talk about. There's procedural due process and substantive. And I think these are worth thinking about in the employment context as well. So what is procedural due process? Procedural due process is the idea that if you employ safeguards, you'll more often than not get the correct result. That's what the jury system is about. What are the safeguards that are involved in a criminal trial? Well, they're the right to trial by jury. So it's not one person deciding your fate. It's much more difficult to decide 12, to get 12 people to decide than it is to maybe get a judge to decide, right? What else do we have? You have the right to confront witnesses. You have the right to present witnesses on your own behalf. So would you want that as part of this process? If somebody says you're not doing your job, would you want to be able to call in your coworkers and say, yeah, you know, they work hard, they go out and meet their quotas, things like that? I think you probably would. So it's not just the right to confront, but it's also the right to present evidence. That's part of procedural due process. The heartland of what we call PDP is notice and hearing. Now, the more egregious the loss, the more process you're going to be entitled to. in the criminal or in the civil system. But the heartland of procedural due process is notice of hearing. Substantive due process deals with, under the Constitution, what we call fundamental rights. Now, employers don't have to provide you with any of these, but again, for those companies that want to be, you have no expectation of privacy. So for example, in the societal realm and in the governmental realm and in the political realm, you have a right to privacy. You all have heard this before. The Supreme Court says that in fact you have a constitutional right to privacy. This was first stated really clearly in a case called Griswold versus Connecticut in 1963. And what happened in this case was Connecticut, like a lot of states, had a law on the books that said that it was illegal to possess, use, distribute, promote contraceptive devices. And this doctor, the major party in Griswold, along with Planned Parenthood and a nurse, sued the state of Connecticut to get the law overturned. It went to the United States Supreme Court. And in a decision written by William O. Douglas, they said, he was famous for writing these very pithy decisions. He wrote it in less than an hour on a train, I believe. He says that there is a constitutional right to privacy. Now, where in the Constitution is the word privacy found? Which amendment? So we have this idea of the Bill of Rights, which establishes that we have a limited government. It's not a government of general police powers. It's limited in scope. And that is applicable to the states via the Due Process Clause and the doctrine of selective incorporation. At the beginning of our country, we had this Bill of Rights that was passed to basically protect citizens and states against the federal government. And in a case called Barron versus Baltimore, a very famous case, Chief Justice John Marshall said, well, the Bill of Rights is only intended as being applied against the national government. Barron was the successor in interest of a wharf in the city of Baltimore. And the city had diverted the river channel in such a way as to cause the wharf to be filled in, and so it was no longer a deep water wharf. What's the value of a wharf? Well, it's the ability to engage in shipping. That's what you want. And so Barron runs to court and says, by their actions, the city has deprived me of my property without due process of law. And in that case, Chief Justice Marshall says, you're correct. If this was an act of the federal government, they would have deprived you of your property. They would have took your property, and that's called the Takings Clause of the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution, without due process of law. But the Bill of Rights only applies to the states. And the reason he says this is because you look at the First Amendment, and the First Amendment begins with the words, Congress shall make no law. And so he says it was only intended to apply to the federal government. It was never intended to apply to the state governments. If you want those same kind of procedures at the state level, you're going to have to appeal to your state government for those rights. We then get the Civil War, and we get 3 amendments in the United States Civil War, or what the historians have now decided is the war between the states, because they decided it wasn't a civil war. And I don't know how you get there, because by all definitions it generally is considered a civil war. But historians have renamed it because we have to come up with new scholarship, I guess, in that discipline, and there's not a whole lot out there. And so they've now started saying it's the war between the states instead of the Civil War. We get 3 amendments to the United States Constitution. The 13th Amendment outlaws slavery and frees the slaves. The 14th Amendment contains the second due process clause in the United States Constitution. And the 15th Amendment gives them the right to vote. It was the intent of the drafters of the 14th Amendment to apply in total the Bill of Rights against the states. And the courts have never done that. That was the intent of the drafters of the 14th Amendment. The courts have said some aspects of the Bill of Rights are so fundamental to ordered liberty as to be applicable against the states through the doctrine of selective incorporation. And the first of these was the First Amendment right of freedom of speech, and that was in a case called Gitlow versus New York. It was the first time they said that the Bill of Rights was actually applicable to the states. So we now have the Bill of Rights being applicable to the states. In Griswold versus Connecticut, the court says there's a right to privacy. So in these first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, where do we find the right of privacy? Not there. Doesn't exist. The word privacy is not found anywhere in the Constitution. So how is it that you have, it was a trick question, I know that was cruel, wasn't it? How is it that you have this constitutional right to privacy? Although the Ninth is part of what Justice Douglas says is makes up these rights. Because the Ninth Amendment and the 10th Amendment are sort of catch-all provisions that say those rights that are not specifically granted to the federal government nor denied to the states are reserved to the states or the people respectively. So the right to privacy doesn't exist. In the opinion, he says it falls in the penumbra and emanations of the Constitution. So now we're borrowing from physics. What is the penumbra? How many of you have seen a solar eclipse? A few of you? I remember the first solar eclipse I saw, I was in, I think, 4th grade, and they had us go out with a box, and you put a hole in the box so that you can see it, because you can't look into the sun, it's bad. It gives you, what does looking into the sun cause? It causes cataracts. It causes cataracts. So you're supposed to wear sunglasses out in the sun. So if you look at a solar eclipse, I'll use my red marker to draw the sun. My black marker to be the moon. Now the moon is a lot smaller than the sun, right? Mm-hmm. We know that. Although I suspect that there are some people who deny science out there, those people who deny global warming, who would say, oh no, the moon is bigger than the sun. Earth is flat. Right? So as the moon, which is the body that's closer, moves in front of the sun, there's this sort of hazy area, the shadow around it, and that is the penumbra. And so this right to privacy in Griswold is found in the shadows of the Bill of Rights. And he says it's in the first, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, sixth, 9th, and 10th Amendments. So the First Amendment contains 5 substantive rights, fundamental rights of due process. When we talk about substantive due process, freedom of speech, press, religion, petition of government for redress of grievances, and assembly. Those are the 5 substantive rights contained in the First Amendment. The Second Amendment is what? It says that you have the right to keep arms. The Third Amendment actually says that no soldiers shall be quartered in private homes during peace times and in times of war only in a manner prescribed by Congress. This was particularly egregious to the colonists. They didn't like this. The British would show up and they would say, well, you have to support the troops so they can, camp out on your farm. What do soldiers do? Well, and you have to support them. That was the way the British sort of supported things. So they'd show up at your farm and, if you have a cow, well, they'd eat the cow or eat the chicken. You're left holding the bag. And so we have this amendment that says no soldiers. It's a holdover. It's one that doesn't seem to go with the others. Fifth Amendment contains a due process clause. The Fourth Amendment, unreasonable searches and seizures are prohibited. All of these things, the court says, contribute to a right to privacy. Now, the thing that I want to point out here is that a lot of times we think we have these rights to privacy, but the right to privacy is only a right of privacy against what kind of intrusion? What kind of intrusion? And this is not so in other places. In Western Europe, they oftentimes, Anglo-American jurisprudence is largely predicated on 2 theories. Utilitarian theory, usefulness, that would be the UCC, for example, the Uniform Commercial Code, and duty. Those are the 2 theories that underlie most of Anglo-American jurisprudence. We don't have a deep personhood theory. They do in European countries. They have this idea, this theory of personhood that says being a person is so unique that there are certain rights that go along with it. And in fact, those rights are inviolable even against other citizens and even against corporations. So for example, in some countries in Western Europe, defamation is not a civil cause of action. It is a criminal cause of action. If you slander or libel somebody, you can go to jail for it. And they have a very broad definition of slander and libel. We don't have that kind of theory. So my point is that this idea of the right to privacy, we all think we have a right to privacy, and we don't with regard to private actions in most instances. Unless there is a statutory right provided you, you don't have a right to privacy against your employer. Can they mandate, can the government come in and say, you have to take a drug test? Could we do that? Could we just start saying we're going to drug test everybody? No, you have a right to privacy. Can your employer? That's a substantive right of privacy. The government can't come in and say, we're going to drug test you. Now, you can give up that right. The rights are not absolute, right? They're not absolute. How can you give up your right to be free from drug testing? Well, get in a car. Get a driver's license. A driver's license is not a right. You don't have a right to drive. It's a privilege. And so there is a quid pro quo between you and the government in which, in this instance, you may have negotiated basically away your right to privacy. And if you get behind the wheel of a car and we suspect that you are driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs, the government can require that you take a breathalyzer. If you're weaving all over the place, down Broadway here in Edmond, they can pull you over and they can say, well, we want you to take a breathalyzer, or we're going to take blood sample. Because driving is a privilege. And by exercising the privilege, you've given up. But if you decide you don't want to drive, you want to walk everywhere, you live in New York City, this is very common. It's unusual for people in New York to get driver's license when they're 16. That's something that almost every kid, although it's amazing to me how many of your generation didn't get driver's licenses at 16. Among my generation, and I'm a Gen Xer, that was a big deal. We couldn't wait to get our driver's license because it was the way you could escape from your parents and get freedom. It was in a car. Now you all can't really escape from your parents anymore. If they want to track you down, they'll put a low jack on your car. Put a low jack on your phone. How many of you track your kids' phones? You have kids. Do they have phones yet? They don't have phones yet. When they have phones, are you going to track them?
Probably starting when they start driving, yeah.
Okay. Going to put a low jack on the car
Probably.
so that you can see where they're going? Tell how fast they're driving? New York City, you don't need a car. In fact, it's really expensive. You'll probably pay more for parking in New York City. My brother's firm pays for his parking, and it's something like $20,000 a year for parking in New York City. That's a hell of a parking bill, isn't it?
A little bit. I don't even make $20,000 a year yet.
You're going into sales though, right?
Yeah.
So you've chosen wisely. You give up that right. But your employer, so if you're walking down the street in New York, the cop can't come up and say, hey, I want you to, step in here and pee into a bottle. Or I want to take your blood. No, they can't do that. You have a right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. What about your employer? Can they ask you to take a drug test? No. No right to privacy there. They can violate your privacy rights all day long, you don't really have much recourse. Now, there are some areas where the law has started to say that's too creepy. Even, there's a privacy right even against employers. They can't engage in genomic testing. They can't test you for HIV. And deny you health care coverage as a result of that. So there are some privacy rights built in. So, substantive rights, privacy. What about other rights? Freedom of speech. Do you have freedom of speech at work? Or can your employer violate that? Huh? Yeah, people get fired all the time. There was a school teacher, they reset Facebook. This was about 5 years ago. Facebook reset all of their settings. They did an update which went through, and everybody who had their Facebook page set to private so only their friends could see it, all of a sudden it was unlocked. And this teacher had posted, I think I told you all this, that her students were nothing but little disease bags. The parents in the community in which she taught were noticeably upset by their little darlings being referred to as disease bags. It's what?
My sister was first grade, and she had a little kid pushed her and made her like roll ankle and pop her ankle. She ended up in the hospital.
That's not a disease bag, that's a physical threat. You know, technically, you have, by the way, more bacteria living in and on your body than all the people in the planet. One individual has more bacteria living in, just if you don't believe me, just drive by the Science Museum of Oklahoma on Lincoln Avenue. They have a big banner ad for one of their new exhibits on germs going on. If we swab your hand, do you know how many pathogens we'll find? Who do you think has, by the way, in this, who do you think has more pathogens on their hands, men or women? Men. You think men have more pathogens on their hands than women? Why?
The way you said it, probably
You think? Why do you think men have more pathogens on their hands than women?
Because they're gross.
Men are gross. I see.
But I can't live without them, but they're disgusting.
Women actually have more pathogens on their on average on their hands than men. Why? Anybody want to guess?
They use more product.
You use lotion. Most men don't obsessively put lotion on, and lotion is nothing but a breeding ground for bacteria. It's gross. Don't use lotion. So, you know, you have some limited rights of privacy. What about freedom of speech? Well, can your employer limit what you can say? Yeah. In certain instances, they can. What about searching? Can your employer search your desk, your work computer? Absolutely. There are some rights that have started to be developed. So the state of Oklahoma, for example, doesn't allow employers to ask you for your passwords to your social networking sites. They can't ask you to, they cannot force you to friend them or allow them access to that. Those kinds of things do provide you with privacy rights, even against your employer. But most of the privacy rights, as exposed by or expanded by Griswold and its progeny, which is Roe versus Wade, which is a 1973 case, are against government. So if your employer finds cocaine in your locker at work, can they turn it over to the police and get you arrested? Absolutely. As a private citizen, can I break into your home, get the evidence that you're a drug dealer and give it to the police? Yeah, I can. And you know what? That can be used against you. Because the Fourth Amendment only prohibits unreasonable searches by the police. So if your neighbors, and this happens in communities where people get mad at each other, you know, particularly in tenements and stuff like that, they get mad and they'll turn in their neighbors. They'll go grab the evidence, give it to the police. It's got your little fingerprints all over the cellophane baggies. of the cocaine or the dime bag that you have. So fundamental rights. What other kinds of fundamental rights would we want in the workplace? Procedural rights, notice and hearing, the right to be heard. We're probably not going to get a jury trial from our employers, right? But what should you have? What would make a nice notice and hearing? So when I started college, most departments that hired people, the people that were responsible for processing forms and paperwork, were called what? Personnel. It was called the personnel department. What is it called today? It's called human resources. And the idea behind the change from personnel to human resources is that it really is a much more expanded function. So what should you want in terms of notice and hearing? Well, you may want, if it's your supervisor that it's accusing you of something, right? You might want to be heard by, and lots of companies provide for this. You have to go through, if you want to terminate someone, you have to go through the human resources department. Why? Well, it's HR that's supposed to make sure that maybe you're not just firing them because you don't like them. That you're not the salesperson who you want the commission from to be paid to you. And so, human resources, somebody who's, some of you said you wanted somebody who was fair. If it's your boss who's accusing you of something or saying you're not doing your job, you might want a third party to listen to this. That's human resources. Progressive discipline. Now, one of the things in your text talks about this that every company will hang its hat on, and I will tell you you shouldn't, is this idea of employment at will. And what they'll do is, even though they have a progressive discipline policy, there will be some disclaimer in their handbook, in the employee handbook, that will say, this does not constitute an employment contract, and nothing in this handbook will alter the employment at will status of the employee. Now, it's a nice doctrine. The employment at will doctrine is a really nice doctrine, but I will tell you, every company I've ever had, when they start to fire somebody, and they ask me, and I don't think it's one that they should fire, when I've done consulting, I'll say, I'll take them to a Walmart. And I'll say to these executives, this is your jury. Pick out 12 people. That's your jury. They look nothing like you. I particularly like to take them to the Belle Isle Walmart. I have found evidence that the Yeti exists in there at the Belle Isle Walmart. And it doesn't matter what time of day you go to the Belle Isle Walmart. It's amazing. There are these people, their knuckles are dragging the ground, and they've got 25 kids, and that's your jury pool. Juries hate employment at will, and I'll tell you why. Because every person who's ever sat on a jury has had a boss that they didn't like. They've had a manager that they did. If you have not experienced this yet, you will at some point. I had it here at UCO. We had this guy that was hired. His name, he was the most gross, controlling, idiotic, stupid, morally reprehensible individual I had ever met in my entire life. He was not even interesting enough to make me sick. And his name was Cornelius Wooten, and he came in and he said, ooh, he told me and my boss, he says, he couldn't pronounce my boss's name, he called him Morales. And my boss's name was Morelli, and he said, Dr. Morales, Dr. Aguirre, you don't know what you're doing. You'll be fired. And I said, with all due respect, sir, I was here before you came, and I'll be here when you leave. And I was. Happiest day of my life. Walked him out of the building. And he left. If you haven't had that experience, you will at some point in your employment history. So juries hate this idea of employment at will. And if they can get around it anyway, if they think that if they can find, if you can survive summary judgment and get to a jury, they will absolutely find a way to fine for the employee if they can, if they think you've done them unfairly. So it's something that you should think about. And these ideas of fundamental rights, I think, are things that we should think about as employers. Being decent to people. Respecting them as, and this idea that they have in Europe of personhood. Common decency. And I don't think it's so common anymore. I think in many respects we've lost a lot of it, and it's something that we should seriously think about. All right, are there any questions about due process in the workplace, employee rights? What we'll do on Thursday is we'll start with your group presentations. We may have to go over on to Tuesday, and then we will do the second half. So for every right that you have, there are also duties that come along with this, and we'll talk about employee duties that you have, how that impacts marketing, what you should give as an employee. So if you're offended that I'm letting you go early because I've got to go to this other meeting, you let me know, you call me and I'll talk to you softly and calmly. If you want to do your presentation for me so that you just had to get it out today, you can follow me over to my office. I've got about 15 minutes before my meeting. No takers on that? Okay, all right.